uh, what the agenda is for today's meeting. So we're going to have a quick update from the city of Boston about what's happening now in terms of COVID-19. We'll go over the relief fund and impact surveys and current resources we have at this time. We'll have an update from Emily Ruddick from Mass Creative about advocacy and state funding. And then we'll have Beth Ann Steiner from MCC talk a little bit about the survey results they received from their impact survey. And then we'll have some time for four arts organizations to talk a little bit about their organizations, how they've been impacted in their response to what's going on in our current state. So Harold Stewart from the Theater Offensive, David Hartman from Massachusetts Production Coalition, Carrie Thompson from Silent Rhythms, and Matt MacArthur from the Record Company. And then we'll have the last 25 minutes to do a Q&A. And during the Q&A, please make sure to use the chat function, which is above on the right-hand side for those of you who are either on iPad. And there is a raise hand function as well. So if you want to raise your hand during someone's presentation to ask a question, please use that. And please make sure to type so that people who are using captions can also see and take your time when you're speaking, so people who are using captions or who are accessible are able to follow what you're saying. Cool. All right. People will be coming in as we continue on, but I'm going to hand it off to Cara to start off with our update about the city of Boston.
Thanks, Pascal. Thanks, everybody. I hope that everyone has made it through week 2 okay, hanging in there as much as possible. I hit a little bit of a Zoom wall and communication wall yesterday myself, so I understand if people are feeling overextended, and just really appreciate everyone joining in after a long week. Feels like a long time since we had this call a week ago. Thanks also to everybody who reached out after last week's call. We're keeping a list of everyone who expressed interest in the conversation on collaborative communications coming from the arts sector to the public, and appreciate everybody who's been able to send us some specifics on what they're noticing in their networks and how they've been impacted. I think if you do have information that's a little bit of a deeper dive on your organization and some specifics around financials, around how you're thinking about employees and programs, just feel free to send anything like that to us, to Pascal. And we are tracking that, and would love to be in touch as things progress, so that we can really understand how everyone's organizations are being affected. And Christine, you can go to the next slide. So I just want to start with the public health update. We are seeing the anticipated increase in the number of confirmed cases in Boston of COVID-19. And the city has launched a dashboard to help visualize and track this information. The link is here. We've also launched a text update service that's available in multiple languages. The instructions are here: text BOSS COVID to 99411. I think there have been at least 1 or 2 updates coming out, public health updates, through this text alert service. So we really recommend signing up for that. This week, we also received the governor's emergency order to close all non-essential businesses and services. We have had a few questions about what this means for having, a person in your organization who needs to do a walkthrough of a facility or a building or pick up checks and that kind of thing. This order is really about limiting services that would have been open to the public and encouraging staying home as much as we possibly can. But you can see the full list of what's considered essential and not essential on the website. We have linked to it here, and we will send out this presentation more quickly this time around. We'll send it out today so that everybody can access all the links that are in the slides. Can we go to the next slide? As a reminder, we do have the Artist Relief Fund available for individual creative workers. We're still raising funds for this. We have over 550 applications, 570 applications. I do see this slowing down a little bit. I think just speculating that a lot of individuals are waiting to see what's going on with the stimulus bill. We had a big surge in the last week, but then in the last couple of days, the application number has slowed. There are also a variety of other funds locally and nationally for different disciplines of artists and workers specifically. We've got links here to the New England Foundation for the Arts resource page and the MCC resource page, which both have a good set of resources and links to local relief funds. Go to the next slide. This week included conversations about unemployment insurance and being self-insured, how to make decisions about furloughing employees or reducing in response to what's happening with the market right now in people's portfolios. I think also this question of how long are we in a period of uncertainty. We've had a lot of conversations about that this week, not knowing, are there going to be waves of restrictions on gatherings and events depending on the patterns and seasonality of this virus and the length of the economic impact that would create. We really don't know yet how that's going to play out and how long this kind of in-between period could last. So we don't have information on that right now. We're hearing a lot of people just struggle with how to plan for that level of uncertainty. We're seeing some people close programs or go kind of partially dark for a longer period of time than they might have originally thought, looking out into the summer, and even some folks looking out past the fall to 2021. So we're seeing people kind of adjust that just as they try to plan for how to be efficient in their decision making, given how long uncertainty could last here. I'm going to actually just pause. That's a really fast recap, but I'm going to pause there because a lot of the questions on here, what's available for individual artists, what is the financial impact, and how are we going to handle some of these things? A lot of these questions are going to now be viewed through the lens of the stimulus bill, which I'm sure everybody's been following, including how funding is available, where are there gaps, are those gaps going to be also in how long it takes for funds to actually reach individuals and organizations. So I'm actually just going to stop there and turn it over to our state partners to talk about what they've learned from the impact to the sector and the state, as well as what we know right now about the relief package. So I'm going to pause.
Cara, shall I start? This is Emily.
Yes.
Okay.
Go for it, Emily.
Okay. I do hope you are all well. Oh no, Beth Ann, do you want to talk first?
Oh.
Sorry, y'all. What's the next slide?
Beth Ann.
Great.
There she is.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's Beth Ann Steiner from Mass Cultural Council, and I would be happy to walk you through sort of the results of the 2 surveys that the agency had out in the cultural sector statewide. We put out 2 surveys last week. They were up for just under 6 days from Monday through Sunday night. There was 2 surveys, one for cultural organizations and one for individual artists or cultural professionals. The results were striking, they were dire, and we shared them immediately with the sector, with our advocacy partners, and with our state legislators because they demand attention. So we had 566 cultural nonprofits fill out the survey, which is actually larger than our pool of grantees. When you think about our CIP portfolio and Gateway grantees, that's about 400 cultural nonprofits. So this survey went wider than the folks that we normally work with on a statewide level in terms of grants that we provide. And then for individuals, 595 individuals reported. So we heard back from more than 1,000 people or entities. Unfortunately, the cultural organizations reported a loss of more than $55.7 million in revenue. That's more than $55.7 million. And that's not projected, that's actual losses to date as of Sunday night. And the individuals reported a loss of $2.89 million in individual income. Again, not projected, actual losses. So when you go to the organizations, it's an average loss of $133,000 per organization. 88 of $14,978 events canceled. 58% of the organizations reported that they were considering layoffs, furloughs, or reduced hours for their employees. And that was impacting a total of 8,221 jobs. And as you can see in the chart there, it's artists who are most severely hit. In terms of our individuals, again, it was $2.89 million reported as a loss for income, which averages out to just over $5,000 a person. Of those responding, and again, that was 595 individuals, 55% said that arts and culture make up 75 to 100% of their total income. And then when talking about the gigs, folks are saying it's about 9 gigs lost per person. So it's pretty striking, and we packaged that up as quickly as we could and shared it with policymakers on Beacon Hill. We shared it with Emily, our advocacy partner at Mass Creative, to get the word out. And we do plan on reissuing these surveys again, probably again right in the very first days of April, to just keep account and keep the data open. And then as we're using it for advocacy, we're also using it ourselves to try to create some programs. And so we're working very quickly right now to create an individual artist emergency relief fund by repurposing some of our fiscal $20, and then also working with NFF to create an organizational support program, both of which we're bringing to our board for approval early next week. So we hope to have some concrete updates on all of that next week.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Beth Ann. All right, now, Emily, it's your turn. Christina, next slide, please.
Hi all, again, hello. So as we speak, the CARES Act is being driven over to the White House for President Trump to sign at a scheduled 4 o'clock signing. That bill was passed by the Senate 2 days ago and was just passed by the House today. And so what I thought I would do is I would kind of go through and highlight sort of the most relevant points related to our sector that are in that bill, and then sort of just what we expect to see happening on the federal level, and then what we can expect to happen on the state at this point. Sound good? Yep. Okay. So I'm actually going to start at the end as opposed to the beginning. And I'm going to put in the chat box. Americans for the Arts put together a really good summary of what's in the bill that they posted 2 days ago, and it's pretty much held. There weren't any changes from the bill from the Senate to the House. So one of the first things I want to talk about is they have included a charitable giving deduction above the line. So for those nonprofits that were following 2 years ago with tax reform law in 2017, or 3 years ago now, excuse me, they increased the standard deduction, which meant that folks who were using charitable deductions to bring down their tax liability, some folks didn't have to do that anymore. And there's been a concern for a while in the nonprofit space and the fundraising space that that's been impacting folks' ability or desire to give. So this will in fact incentivize giving, and so it will be for up to $300, right? So that's not our big major donors. That's sort of folks who, like, in this moment, this is going to be a pretty tight moment, but those dollars may still matter for a lot of our nonprofit organizations. That's a useful thing to know that came out of the bill. So then the other piece is, this is related to individuals. So they expanded unemployment insurance, and they are now including coverage for freelancers or independent contractors. So independent contractors will be able to file for unemployment. They then put together basically 2 packages of small business loans and disaster emergency loans. And the thing that's interesting about these loans, and I'm just hitting sort of the highlights. I'm seeing in the chat that Nat points out that the National Council of Nonprofits also had a great analysis. Totally agree. But one of the highlights of these loan packages is that they are meant to incentivize holding on to staff and not laying staff off. So there is a provision where if you apply for these loans and during the term of the loan, you don't lay off staff and you apply the loan for payroll, the loan will be forgiven. So it's sort of like a deferred grant as long as you meet the requirements of that, which is a pretty big deal, right? When we're talking about going into a really unclear future about when we're going to be able to start seeing revenue in some of our earned revenue in some of our organizations. The other big piece that I think we should all be aware of is that they have put together another set, $5 billion for community development block grants. And I'm sure some of you have the experience of applying for or being part of the community block grant program in your city. This is a place where we should be really working very closely with city government to think about how the arts and cultural groups can be a part of that block grant application program. Is that we're really, frankly, I was relieved to see as a part of this bill. Then specifically, they've also appropriated $75 million for the National Endowment of the Arts and $75 million for the National Endowment for the Humanities. For context, following 9/11, $50 million was appropriated for the National Endowment for the Arts. So if you're a half glass full person, that's been an increase. If you are sort of looking but it is some. 40% of both of those streams of money, for the NEA and the NEH, will be regranted out to state agencies. So that's something we'll be paying attention to and taking a look at. Additionally, Congress is waiving the matching grant requirements for those dollars, which is a big deal, right? Instead of having to raise money to meet those, whatever the grant is that you get from the NEA or the NEH, that's been eliminated right now, so we can fast track those. Stacy, I'm going to answer your question in just a second, but I do see it in the chat box. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Libraries and Museum Sciences, the Kennedy Center, and the Smithsonian also all received direct dollars in this CARES Grant Act. So there's a lot here, and I'm just doing a very surface level, sort of bullet points of it, but there's a lot here and a lot of opportunities where we as a sector need to think well beyond that $75 million to the National Endowment and make sure that we are ready and prepared and working quickly to apply for those small business emergency loans and those economic injury disaster loans, working to make sure that we are helping our independent contractor friends to know that they can take advantage of these unemployment insurance and get filed as soon as possible. And it's not entirely clear how quickly these dollars are going to move. I think everybody who worked on this bill, they recognize that time is of the essence, and so they're going to try to fast track a lot of this, but we'll still see sort of how that plays out. Then the other piece is, I just want to put a plug in, and Beth Ann, I hope it's okay, you can slap my wrist later. I do know that the Mass Cultural Council is going to be working on some trainings around this and sort of helping unpack some of this. And
yes.
Then also, is that true, Beth Ann?
Yeah, we're preparing to bring that to our board for approval on Tuesday, but we're partnering with NFF, and it will be a package of technical assistance and financial grants. And the technical assistance is specifically going to help these organizations access these federal funds, how to, produce a robust application, because the SBA is not used to working with our sector.
Right. So thank you. And thank you for taking, for making sure that we can sort of think about this, because it is, it'll be a little bit different for SBA. I'm also including in the chat box a link to Americans for the Arts. They are holding a briefing on the bill. They will probably, a lot of the things that I just covered, they'll cover, but they'll go into more depth. It is next Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And it is open to anyone, is my understanding. So that's another resource that's out there. And I appreciate them. They're pretty good at breaking these down and distilling to the big bullet points to help make sense of all of this. So what does that mean? It means that now we can expect that the state legislature, knock wood, is going to start moving into action. The last week I shared with you that the assumption was that they were sort of waiting to see what was going to come from the feds and then figure out how they were going to fill in gaps or address issues that might be more specific to Massachusetts. So that's going to mean a lot of advocacy work on all of our parts. So to that end, I just want to remind you, right now, Mass Creative has an action alert set up to write into your legislators. We use the opportunity, as Beth Ann mentioned, about the Mass Cultural Council data to send in some policy recommendations to lawmakers, and this action item follows up on that. So if you haven't had the opportunity to and I would also encourage you in that email, it's a form email, so we try to make it really easy to do, but I would also encourage you to include your individual story of how this is impacting you and or what's happening with your organization, particularly around a couple of key items. So there is some resource and relief for organizations who are having to make tough choices around laying off staff. And I think, as I mentioned last week, one of the issues we that came to a head pretty quickly is that some arts organizations, nonprofit organizations took advantage of opting out of paying into the unemployment fund in Massachusetts, which makes sense. You self-insure. If you lay someone off every once in a while and they need to collect benefits, you can cover that. But if you're talking about having to make a dramatic and emergency downsize, that doesn't really cover it. So sorry, the chat box I'm getting some good questions here. So we are working really hard with the Mass Nonprofit Network to make sure that that issue is addressed, so that arts and cultural organizations that have to make that tough choice to lay off staff and haven't paid into the system may have some recourse, including some delays on having to reimburse back the employment fund until maybe they're able to get some sort of loan in place, etc. So that's what I'm sort of seeing. There's a question in the chat: when are you hearing that the state legislature will start working on legislation? My understanding is that there are working groups that were formed 2 weeks ago, and that they've already started looking at possible how bills are moving, and it's very clear that they seem to be clearing the decks so that they can move things through pretty quickly. So I would say the sooner the better in terms of outreach and advocacy. As bills start as bills start coming out and being released, we're going to work really hard to go through those, work with our partners inside the building and with our other advocacy partners to make sure that you all know about when it's time to say, this is the bill that we really care about, or this is the amendment to that bill that has to happen in order to make sure that the creative community and the cultural community is covered in that piece of legislation. So the loans, so I'm getting some questions. So my understanding is that the SBA will be working with banks to do those loans. So you should be in contact with your banks. And then I also am seeing just in my email traffic that particularly if you're on the North Shore, maybe some of you are, the North Shore Economic Alliance has put together some webinars and trainings with their SBA team out there, and that might be a resource to take a look at. Pascal, I'll try to find those links and send them to you after this meeting. So I just want to check and see, are there any, so that's what I expect to see. Yeah. Yes, so Joyce in the chat box is encouraging you to reach out to your banks. Yes, I think now is the time to reach out to your banks. So then the other thing, any sense of whether timing will be an issue to apply for these loans? Is there a risk of the money running out? That's a good question, and I think it's one that we probably should take into account. I would say we should move pretty quickly to make sure that you are in a position to apply as soon as it opens, and that you don't run into any trip ups related to paperwork or materials you need for the application. Okay, so those are some real specific questions. Again, I'm going to point out that the MCC is working with the Nonprofit Finance Fund to sort of provide some trainings around that are coming up. And then I also believe that already the Nonprofit Finance Fund has some toolkits and materials that they're going to make available on their website that you should take a look at. So I think for now, those are what I've got in terms of updates. That bill, the CARES Act moved pretty quickly, and so we've all been sort of waiting and watching the House do some, pass it and then make its way over to the president for signature, and then unpack it to make sure we all understand it correctly. So there's more coming, and I think we're all working to make sure that you have that information, and there will be more advocacy asks that come up. Any other questions before I stop? Veronica mentions that, yes, nonprofits are a qualified group to apply for those loans. Yes, absolutely. It does apply to the SBA 7A loans. That is true. That's another question in the chat box. So I will continue to be in the chat box and try to take more questions offline, but I want to make sure that the agenda keeps moving forward. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Emily. Awesome. All right. So our next...
Maybe I just want to add that as we get updates from MCC and Mass Creative, we'll also share them out to everybody who's been on these calls into these lists. So if you have more specific questions, we'll be funneling information to everybody here as we get it as well.
It's Emily. I stopped too soon. Can I just make one more plug? And this is if it's okay, Cara and Pascal.
Go for it.
Okay. So in terms of advocacy, writing to your legislators is always great. And we have a couple of quick actions to take. Next Thursday, the co-chairs of the Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development Committee are going to be on a listening session that the Mass Cultural Council and Mass Creative are co-hosting. This is a really, really great thing to have as many people participate in, so that they understand the full breadth of what the impact has been for our sector, and also for them to hear directly about what's holding you up in this moment. What are the things that are stopping you from being able to make decisions, or what's the information that you feel like you really need in this moment that they can help you with? Obviously, their sphere of influence is really around policy, but they are interested to hear from all of us, and I want us to take advantage of that session. So Matt asked, can we get a link to the listening session? So Beth Ann already posted it. She's posted it right there, and I'm sure Pascal, you'll be willing to include that in the materials that you send out after this meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so it's April 2nd at 1 p.m. And now,
yes, and it's open to everybody, anyone in the sector.
And Eve asked, should we encourage board members, instructors, and students to attend as well? Yes, I think we should include all of those constituents. And then Joyce mentions that, so let me just go back to the Fed for a second. So they passed that bill. It was the third COVID-related bill that the Congress passed. They're going on a short recess, and Pelosi is saying she expects that there'll be a fourth recovery package that we can expect. A lot of the provisions in this CARES Act cover shorter periods of time, and I think they're trying to get immediate relief. But as things develop and as we sort of see how this is all going to play out and the tail of this pandemic is playing out, they are looking to make sure that they are thinking about more recovery moving forward. So if you have an opportunity, now would be a great time to thank our congressional delegation. In particular, Richie Neal, who is a congressman from the western part of our state, is the chair of House Ways and Means. That's an incredibly powerful position. So if anyone on this call has a zip code that is in Western Mass, now is a great time to thank him for his work and remind him that the creative community is going to benefit from that hard work. But in general, the whole congressional delegation should hear from us and to make sure that they know the arts sector is paying attention to this.
Thanks so much, Emily, for all that info. I did get the link, so I will be sending that out in the meeting recap email, which hopefully will go out today, if not early Monday. So please look out for that link to the meeting next Thursday at 1 p.m. Cool. If you also have questions for Emily, please continue using the chat function, and you can privately send her a question there. And we will also have the last 20 to 25 minutes for questions as well. So we just want to keep moving along. Next slide, please, Christina. So now we're going to have some share outs from a few organizations. First up is Harold Stewart from the Theater Offensive.
Thank you, Pascal. And thank you, I think, to everyone, the City of Boston, especially the Arts and Culture team, for creating this space and continuing to be dedicated to these types of conversations. So just wanted to lead out with some gratitude. I think at the Theater Offensive, for those of you who don't know our organization, last year we celebrated 30 years of being a queer and trans cultural organization. And then last year we also announced a new mission that made us a queer and trans people of color organization by mission. Always have been a Boston organization, working locally, regionally, and nationally in very creative ways to do cultural organizing, as well as creative youth development. And so at the Theater Offensive, in terms of, how we're impacted by this moment, we, like many people, have to cancel or postpone any. At first, we started with kind of public programming, thinking that we could still do some other work. And then it just became clear, just for planning purposes, that we just needed to just hit pause and try to regroup and think. So right now, all kind of forms of programming are paused. And one of the things for the Theater Offensive, we have a motto, economic justice is really core to who we are. So by canceling, say, public programs that would have been ticketed, we only budget about $1,000 of earned income for ticketed revenue against a $1.7 million budget, because most of the things are free or pay what makes you happy. And the way we're able to do that is, I say fundraising is a program at the Theater Offensive, because sometimes it feels like we have more fundraising activities or just as many as program activities, but that's the way we can have kind of economically accessible kind of programs. And so all of those fundraising activities, just how the year was shaping up, ended up being in the last 2 quarters. And so all of those are canceled, which include our youth fundraiser, Be on the Stage. We had to cancel it like days before the governor, or actually it was the same week that the governor made his kind of state of emergency address. So we canceled that. We have a fundraiser connected to the Boston Marathon. So we were like, what's gonna happen with the marathon? So we've moved that until the new day, September 14th, which is a new fiscal year for us. And then we do our largest fundraiser is typically connected to May, June, and Pride and things like that. So we've had to cancel that and just figure out our kind of financial outlook, meaning canceling all programs, largely the fundraisers related to those programs, and still having a desire to want to, the internal conversation is, how do we best serve our mission now? And then still, because we know today has been the hardest day, I think, for me emotionally, because we're starting to really understand a week later the impact of LGBTQ folks and COVID-19. So some kind of Zoom conversations around housing insecurities and food insecurities. So even reimagining programs, it's been, I would say, interesting, not necessarily hard, to think about. For our creative youth development program, we can do some virtual meetings, so they're connected, but there's also risk there when you're talking about being virtually out in a space that might not be the safest space for you. But then also, how do you recreate things like temporary food and temporary housing and things like that? The Theater Offensive has decided that we want to try to honor as many of our contractual relationships with artists and folks as possible that we had throughout June. I think last time we talked about creating some emergency relief funds for artists and youth, as well as kind of the Theater Offensive has this momentum going and had this momentum going, and we're trying to keep it. Some of you may know we announced publicly that we were, on our way to building a new space, thanks to relationships with the city and a private developer in the Fenway area that's a dedicated LGBTQ kind of arts and community space. So what does that mean, now in this moment? And I think we have a lot of ideas, especially thinking about what happens next and how brick and mortar spaces in the city are going to be important to revitalizing the sector. So we've been just talking to our board around different scenarios and ways and strategies because, we knew it was an important space before, and still I think it's relevant to the rebuild of the sector, and at least the theater fence of being able to take a part of the sector, LGBTQ folks, LGBTQ arts, and things that impact our lives and contribute back seems important. And how do you do that in uncertain ways? But it still really is important. So what we're doing, I just announced, some of those funding kind of obligations that we see. And we're launching, we usually have an appeal around Pride, which is the last month of our fiscal year that says show your TTO Pride for 30 days. And now we're moving that appeal up to be announced next week to talk about the fierce urgency of now and seeing, and it's really, it's hard to ask for money when everybody, we're just trying to have some sensitivity around how to ask and navigate it, but we think it's important that we put an appeal out there and just see what comes back. And the last thing I'll mention, we're as an organization trying to put our stake in the ground that says, the Theater Offensive actually was born out of the AIDS epidemic and used arts to, build community, connect, and do all of these other things, and then became more institutionalized but never lost sight of who we were, our birthright, and the way we serve. So there's a leadership opportunity here, which is we're proud about, and we're trying to kind of navigate that, how do we reposition ourselves? And we're still movement oriented. And towards that end, the last thing I'll mention is there's cultural workers locally who start to gather because it's for those of us who are doing equity watches, it's not hard to look at all the inequities that are happening around things that are just, happening rapidly. So in short, there's this movement for cultural salvation because there's a lot that we can talk about the short term. But those of us who live our lives, this way and think about long-term survival, if we don't begin to think about how do we come together and make recommendations to funders, to media, policymakers around, the long-term survival of the sector and bringing back together and what long-term aid looks like. And, we're uniquely positioned and we have collective intelligence to be able to have those recommendations. And I think, some of I'm from Dallas, so Boston and Massachusetts is the right city to do this kind of collaborative work and movement work. So we're excited about that. I think you'll hear more about it. My colleagues, I just want to shout out Karthik and Summer. Summer has been talking about it on Jared Bowen, is that his name, show. So you'll hear about it, and then we'll make sure Pascal has information for some larger conversations next week around just making sure that there's a movement for equity in the salvation of the cultural sector.
Thanks so much, Harold. Awesome. David, are you on?
Hi, everyone. This is David Hartman. I'm the director of the Mass Production Coalition. Thank you, Harold, for sharing, and for Cara and Pascal for organizing this opportunity for all of us to share. Mass Production Coalition, for those of you who don't know, is the trade organization that serves the film and media industry here. What we do is advocacy and policy work. We produce programs, so professional development and cultural programming for people in our sector and allied creative communities. Our industry has been immediately and pretty severely impacted by the COVID-19 virus and the measures. With the sudden stop of work, productions of all kinds are currently grounded, including 7 major films and episodic series that were on the ground from Disney Plus, Netflix, AMC, Sony, and others. So that's immediately hundreds of workers that are displaced, with those programs on suspension. Many businesses and vendors in our community have been immediately impacted and forced to lay off or furlough a significant number of employees, or reduce staff time as needed. And that's also, hundreds of creative and technical jobs that are on pause, while this situation works itself out. Like many of you, a good portion of our industry is freelance. So there are a lot of people looking for information and resources. I don't know if anyone's produced a guide, but I think a lot of people in our industry are having a hard time accessing the right people at DUA to really organize where freelance fits into different parts of things, where their pay frequency is different, locations and other kinds of information. So if people have, excuse me, some basic resources to share there, that would be super helpful. How we've been impacted as an organization, we had last year did about 17 unique programs and events. It's everything from networking events to seminars to an annual conference, and excuse me, all of those have been immediately postponed. We're moving a number of things digitally, including member gatherings and places to help give businesses and people access to each other and, specialists in different areas where they can make progress. We've currently suspended one staff position, and we're probably looking at minimum a reduction of 30% of our overall operating income from programs, and where our sponsorship and all of the other kinds of revenue that are generated as a result of those is obviously still fairly unknown. Having said all that, we're pretty optimistic in terms of what the long term, the big picture looks like. This is an industry that's pretty resilient, is highly mobile, and will move pretty quickly. But, like everyone, it's just, what does the runway look like for now? And, how long will it be until those jobs and projects start to return? We're also a little bit optimistic that, with recovery comes some kind of opportunity for, the way that like all of us are organizing here, that, maybe we can create some long-term impact and change that'll be good for everyone. I think
Great.
That's pretty much it for now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David. There was a comment in the chat box about the unemployment for freelancers. Joyce said, once the state gives guidance on how the expanded unemployment will be operationalized, City Hall will share that guidance. In the meantime, everyone should gather their paperwork, 1099 invoices, so you are ready to go when the time comes. So thanks so much for that info, Joyce. And Cara said, Volunteer Lawyers for Arts is looking at making a guide for those accessing unemployment funds, also providing technical assistance. And I know we at the Mayor's Office are also trying to figure out a webinar for unemployment as well. So look for that info coming soon. Carrie, are you on?
Oh, yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share a few things. And I'm Carrie Thompson from Silent Rhythm. I'm the executive director, and the organization has been around for almost 10 years now. And we are a nonprofit organization to promote the inclusion of people with disabilities in the arts while using the arts to promote inclusion in society. A personal note about myself is that I am also deafblind. And so the work comes from a very passionate, personal place for me. The work that I do with Silent Rhythm is that most of what we do is offering workshops and classes to teach dance to people with disability, while also offering educational opportunity for general society to learn how to be inclusive. Some examples of our classes are, one is the Solstice ASL class, which is the first 45 minutes would be teaching American Sign Language, and then the other part would be teaching dance class. So people who are deaf and hearing can learn side by side as a way to try to learn together. The second workshop that we would offer is a dance workshop for the deaf-blind, where we will first teach how to communicate with people who are deaf-blind. Then we will offer a tactile dance class for the deaf-blind. And then the third area of our work is Inclusion 101, which is focusing on how to teach the general community, the dance community, about how to be accessible. And we've had to cancel a couple of our events, and some of them are postponed. And I'm the only one on the staff, but I hire a lot of freelancers, sign language interpreters, DJs, dance teachers, and like so many other organizations that have had canceled events, it does mean loss of income for them. But I have been coming up with creative ideas to still pay my freelancers by trying to give them new projects. Like, for example, the DJs that I work with for the actual classes, I asked them if they could create some special songs for me and come up with a special playlist for a future event. So I'm trying to think about how can I give them income now for future events coming up and at the end of the year, hopefully. I should emphasize that the work I do with Silent Rhythms is about trying to focus on the most marginalized of the marginalized population. It's not simply just those with a disability, but those that are especially marginalized, like those who are deaf-blind, those who are deaf, those who are blind only, those with intellectual disabilities. And even though I don't consider people with physical disabilities among the most marginalized in this population, I do feel that they are marginalized from the dance sector. So I do include them in my work. Many of my students have said that they've already feel isolated. Isolation is nothing new to them. They've been isolated for years before even COVID-19 became a term that we all know. And one of the things that we have been trying to do in this new normal is find ways to still provide services for our students and the general community. And it's really important that people understand that for the deaf-blind community, it's a huge loss that we cannot touch people right now. Think about how we communicate. People who are deaf-blind tend to communicate through tactile sign language, through touch, through touching the body, and they learn as well through hands-on methods. So right now, we are cut off from being able to touch people, and we are cut off from being able to communicate, and it's having a dire impact. For many of my students who've come to Silent Rhythms workshop, it was the only chance they had to interact socially and to be with other people. And a lot of people now are talking about trying to stay connected through video chat and through online calls, or through just general emails. But it's very difficult for members of the deaf-blind community to be connected in this way. So one part of Silent Rhythms work and my work is trying to find alternates and trying to stay in touch with one another. And it's also, for people with disabilities, technology is a huge way that we accommodate our lives personally and professionally. And as more and more people are relying on technology for general day-to-day activity, we're also finding that many people in the community do not know how to use technology in an inclusive and accessible manner. So we're trying to focus our work a little bit more on trying to educate society about how to be inclusive and accessible in a virtual space. And you may or may not be aware, but this is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act this year. And some of you may be thinking that your audience is not people with disabilities, which I would ask, why not? Because people with disabilities are part of our society. It shouldn't be that their only interest would be in the art targeting people with disabilities. It should be open. We should be thinking about all people, and all of our work should be thinking about all people and not assume that people with disabilities would not be interested or that they cannot do the different work and services that you offer. And some of you may not even realize that you have an obligation under Title II and Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which does cover web accessibility. So it's important to think about that. And as a grantee, I know that when I signed my grant agreement, I made a promise that I would not discriminate against people with disabilities. So all of us have an obligation to make sure that we comply with it. And I think for the most part, most people would be willing to. They just say, I don't know how to do that. And there are a number of ways that Silent Rhythm is trying to compensate. So one way, we are also, like many other dance companies and dance teachers, we're going to offer a virtual dance class, but this will be in an accessible manner. We created a special Facebook group for the deafblind, which is specifically related on providing resources about the COVID-19, because a lot of resources out there are not accessible for people with disabilities. And even those that are focusing on sharing information to the deaf community, it's not accessible for the deafblind. So this new Facebook group is about specifically trying to help provide communication access. So even though this isn't about communication access for the arts, it's about trying to give this very marginalized population another forum for access to information. A third way that we are working on this is, I don't know if some of you saw this morning that the Mayor's Arts and Culture, the Mayor's Office Arts and Culture on Facebook shares a blog that Silent Rhythm created, and it's called Inclusion 101, Inclusive Distancing. And so after I finish my talk, I can add the link to that blog in the chat, unless somebody else does that for me. And I should also note that I can't see what you're saying in the chat. So later, if you have specific questions for me, perhaps Kara or Pascal can read them for me. I don't and it's showing up on my iPad to the side. And so when one of you asks the question, I'll see the question on my iPad. The fourth way that we are trying to support education is we're going to hold several Inclusion 101 virtual classes. So if you follow Silent Rhythms on Facebook, we will start to set up some Inclusion 101 virtual classes that will teach about accessible social media, how to have accessible a website. And then it will also give tips on how to provide accessible virtual classes, whether it's dance or other types, or how to provide accessible video conferencing. In the blog on Inclusion 101, there are already 3 different areas that we provide tips on. One is for how to have accessible American Sign Language video that was meant for the deaf community. I'm coughing, but it's because I swallowed too much air. The second one is, what was the second one? The second area is about trying to have accessible virtual dance classes. So those are already up in that blog. The third way is that we provided tips on how to have accessible web conferencing, such as Zoom or anything else. And then And also, we talked about how to caption videos, and so that blog also provides information on how to caption. And I think I will stop right here as I don't want to take too much time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Truly appreciate it. We did get the link to the blog, so I'll be sure to include that in the resource email that we'll send out later. And just like Carrie said, if you have any questions between now and the end of our meeting, just put them in the chat and I'll read them aloud so that we can get Carrie to answer them about that. Thanks so much, Carrie, for sharing this information. It's truly, truly invaluable. All right, last and certainly not least, Matt MacArthur from The Record.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Great. My name's Matt. Thanks for the time. The Record Co. is a music workspace. So our typical programming is operating recording space, music making space for people in person. Fortunately, we've been under construction, and so we actually were not open to the public when this all started. So I'm just very, very grateful that we've experienced minimal disruption. If the construction stoppage were to, because we're under construction, if the construction stoppage were to continue for an extended period of time, that could put us in really significant financial peril. But for the moment, we have a little bit of runway and are hopeful that we'll be able to get back on track soon. Because we have a little bit of time and capacity as a result of what I just mentioned, we started a COVID-19 fund for music makers. It began on March 12th. The idea was small, rapid grants to music makers who are experiencing lost income as a result of COVID-19. In the last 14 days, that fund has received 870 applications. We've raised about $57,000 during that time period, which has allowed us to make grants of up to $200 to about 300 applicants so far. And we continue to raise money and distribute money as quickly as we can. It's just a dollar in, a dollar out. That fund, we're thinking now, is a temporary effort, tentatively maybe another 8 weeks, after which we'll start directing folks to medium and longer term opportunities. Some learnings from that work so far. Individuals, those 870 people that have applied so far, are experiencing between $50 and $25,000 of lost income each. And that's just to date. That doesn't count, any gigs that have not yet been canceled. We're hearing from music teachers and non-performers asking about their eligibility. Some music teachers are wondering, am I eligible for something like this? The answer, of course, is yes. Non-performers like front of house, sound engineers, or venue staff who otherwise would have been making money servicing musical performances are asking too. They need help as well. We're finding that speed and equity of funding decisions are mostly at odds with one another. So the faster we try and give away money, the potentially less equitable the distribution of those funds are. So in general, it would take us longer to find, to reach and to encourage the most vulnerable individuals to apply. And so as a result, the faster we give money away, our hypothesis, which we've not proven yet, is that this may not be the most equitable way to help. Speed and collectivism are at odds too. So as we think about this effort and what it might look like in the future, we're definitely asking ourselves if it would have been better to potentially to wait and form a more collective multidisciplinary approach, or combine forces with another organization. We certainly are going to have been able to help hundreds of people, but are wondering sort of what the collective effort might have looked like. Simple stuff, rapid, sending lots of people small amounts of money very quickly is actually technically very challenging. The only way we've been able to do it so far is using some of the business functionalities of our PayPal business account. And of course, as you would expect, applications to that fund and donations to that fund are slowing over time. So the larger the application pool gets and the longer time goes on, the fewer applications we're getting and the less money we're raising. I will paste it in the chat. There's a guide about relief funds, if anyone's thinking about this, that Springboard for the Arts in Minnesota put together that's really, really good. It's got a lot of some of the same things I'm mentioning. And then finally, before I let you go, at an organizational level, so once once we start to get back to construction and think about reopening to the public, some things we're thinking about: donor behavior is definitely going to change entirely. So our relationships with our existing donors, our ability to attract new donors and fundraising opportunities will be completely different after this moment. We expect that most donors will give less or will not give at all, that many donors will give more reluctantly than they would have, and that very few donors will give more support or give support faster than they would have, just because of their particular understanding of the circumstances and their ability to help. Generally, I'm sure you all have realized this, people are much less available. So even when it comes to communicating with my own board, they're difficult to reach as they try and homeschool and adjust to their new normal. So we're just trying to give people time and space to figure that out. We expect that program participant behavior will change. So, we are in the business of operating physical space for people to get together, and that space is shared by hundreds or thousands of people. That's obviously going to be more challenging post or throughout COVID-19. So that's something that we're having to problem solve for. We're also considering interim programmatic opportunities like loaning equipment out instead of inviting people in, and also providing virtual professional development opportunities. Finally, from a financial perspective, we are currently preparing ourselves for construction to be very late and for the sort of supply chain interruption to potentially be quite long. It looks like it froze, but maybe I'm still here.
We can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Almost done. So we are thinking that construction will be late and will therefore have cost much more than it would have otherwise. We're also thinking that the usage of the space is going to ramp up more slowly. So as we reopen, it's going to take longer to attract people to physically come to the space than it would have under different circumstances. So we're thinking about things like limited hours of operation, limited staffing, and ways to incentivize usage once it's safe for people to use the space. So thank you again for the time, and I'm available to anyone, anytime, by email or phone if I can be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt, for that update. If we go to the next slide, which is just a quick next steps of what we're doing right now. Cara, could you talk a little bit about this?
Sure. So we've been collecting some of these resources and articles about just to help us think about how do we communicate the role and importance of the cultural sector in this time. We've just been adding to this. Thanks for people who have been sending us articles and keep sending them, and we'll keep this list updated. Shout out to Danya Sherman for sending the 3 that we've added here that are really about arts and artists in relation to disaster recovery and public health. And so there's the whole narrative around the relationship between those things and how that's been talked about in following other kinds of disasters or crises. So we're just kind of collecting that right now just for reference and to help us kind of take a step back or up out of our kind of individual experiences and organizational immediate issues to that question of how do we think about positioning ourselves in this conversation right now. With regard to virtual programs, and some folks have been doing this, please feel free to email Christina Carroll in the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture so that we can promote anything that people are moving online. Arts Boston also has a calendar of virtual programs that's up and running. And so you can feel free to post things there as well. And we'll keep promoting things on our social media and through our newsletters to make sure that people are taking advantage of that programming. And then lastly, there are webinar opportunities that we'll keep promoting, and we'll send these back out. There's a recording of the MCC COVID-19 preparedness for the cultural sector webinar. And then the 2 that were mentioned earlier that we'll make sure to send out with the slides are the MCC legislative listening session and the AFTA briefing. And when you go to register for the AFTA briefing, just go to the top right of your screen to register for that. Otherwise, you'll be like looking for a registration button for a long time like I did. So just to save you that. And then I think lastly, we want to just make sure that we're hearing from all parts of the sector and hearing from everyone's network. So I know we're about to transition to a Q&A. We know that we need to make some time for arts education and creative youth development on these calls. We also definitely want to hear from the for-profit arts organizations. Excited to hear what Harold and others are working on with regard to an equity framework. So I would just say, if you're having conversations within your networks or you don't see yourself reflected here yet, just please reach out to us so that we can build in time to talk about the issues that every kind of subset of the arts sector is dealing with. But I think that that's it in terms of next steps right now. I think we're really going to be looking at the advocacy steps that Emily was talking about earlier in the call, and looking at really how's the stimulus package going to hit the ground. So I know that that's what a lot of people's questions are about. And like I said, as soon as we have any next steps or any information on that, we're going to share it back out with everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Cara. Great. So we'll move into our last section of the meeting, which are questions. It's open Q&A. As I mentioned, so that we are able to make it accessible for all individuals. So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. We'll try our best to answer them. Okay, question. Might you all have the capacity to facilitate a open source calendar around COVID-19 arts webinar moments? There's such an overload of information, it's hard to figure out where to show up when.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've all been feeling inundated, and we could work on that. I think, Pascal and I will talk about that.
Yep, definitely. Great question. Is there a baseline the city is using or anticipating for things to start again? July, September? It's from Temple Gill at the Huntington.
It's so hard to say, Temple. I think what we don't know is when things will actually be up and running, but I think that what I was saying earlier about how long the uncertainty might last and the decisions that might force all of us to make, just in order to be conservative enough about where we're spending our time and resources. I am seeing a lot of people pushing through the summer and even canceling things in the fall, and really thinking about like 2021. I wouldn't say the majority of folks are there yet, but I am seeing that start to happen. But from a city perspective, I think, we really just genuinely don't know. I'm sorry, that's not a helpful answer.
And a similar question from Elizabeth, how are organizations addressing fall events? Is there a sense that audiences will be ready to sit in a space together by then? I think it's a similar thing that Cara was saying, but I don't know if you want to add anything else, Cara.
No, I mean, I think that the question of audiences being ready is a really important one, and we have been having a lot of conversations about that. I think this is maybe a sub-conversation of the communications piece. So how to communicate to the public a sense of confidence and a sense that the sector is organized, so that when doors do reopen, there's enough of a kind of like a communications muscle there that's been built up, where we can really have a campaign about returning to things. So I think we're really committed in the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture to help think through what that looks like, so that it's not just kind of like fits and starts of people starting up without really addressing how to influence that audience behavior and that audience confidence.
Thanks, Cara. Any other questions people are wondering about? Are you able to assist organizations to inform BPS about online resources?
Yes, BPS is doing some of their own coordination about online classes with some of the organizations that they already had relationships with. If folks do want to get in touch with BPS about new resources that you have online, you should feel free to send those to us. And we are sending updates to our colleagues at BPS. And I think Tony actually, is Tony still on the call? You may not be. But yes, we're able to help with that communication. Oh, Tony is here. Yes. Tony, do you want to talk a little bit about how BPS is coordinating some of this?
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so I mean, on our own end, we've been doing a lot of curating of both online and kind of packet materials for as an equity lens. We're trying to just hit up either take-home packets that we're giving out at the 16 food locations, or we're also providing Google Classroom curriculum for all the art forms. And then additionally, we're going to have a half-hour art special on the Boston Neighborhood Network. So we're trying to hit all angles. I think Nicole brought up from Open Door Arts that one of the things we're struggling with right now is just being able to collect art supplies for students. That type of consumable right now is just kind of tough to do on our end. So just bringing people together for that. But also, if you have any ideas from anyone in the arts community that wants to help with us, I'll put my email address down, and feel free to email me. Is that good? There we go.
Yeah, that's great, Tony. Thanks. And I think maybe, there's enough organizations who are either providing out of school or in school, or would have been providing out of school or in school arts education support. And, we might want to spend time on a future call just thinking through some of this. And it sounds like there's already some people who are trying to figure out like the supplies question. So if that's something, Tony, that we want to spend time on in the future, let's definitely do that.
Thank you.
Rachel asked, for really small organizations that have one part-time employee, is this considered being on payroll? Might there be an expert lawyer that could easily answer whether an organization will qualify for help?
Hi, I was talking, but I was muted. It's Emily. So I'm going to give another plug for Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts, and that's Luke, who runs that practice, and they're under the Arts and Business Council of Massachusetts. They are an amazing resource and can answer, I think, any question that or as many questions as you can come up with related to unemployment and employment law. And so I want to be real careful, because this is my weekly reminder. I did not, in fact, go to law school. Probably should have at this point. But I think it has to do with, if you're getting a W-2 from the organization, you are considered on their payroll. But do reinforce the talk with Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. Jim, Grace, if you're on the line still, can you confirm that I am not giving out bad advice?
And can I?
Yeah.
Can I add to my question? This is Rachel Goodwin from Convergence Ensemble. We picked there's a very young person who has lost his other main job, and we had already picked previously to hire him as an independent contractor. Does that automatically? I'm trying to figure out if we could qualify for the CARES program. The one you were just describing. And yeah.
Yeah, this is Jim. I think I would just apply and talk to myself or Luke about it, because these are sometimes case by case. But Emily is right. If you're a W-2 employee or a furloughed employee that was laid off, you would qualify for unemployment insurance. Otherwise, I would just give us a call. Yeah.
Okay. So, but don't apply yet, right? It's not a W-2 situation.
If it's not W-2 yet, no, then a 1099 employee would not be covered by unemployment at this time. That's correct.
Under this new package.
Under the old, up until the new federal legislation, we're, like Emily said, we're still working on exactly how that's going to work and who's going to qualify in the process by which those people would be able to apply. So that's still being worked out. So old rules, no, if you're 1099, you don't get unemployment.
I already knew that, yeah. But I'm trying to figure out if they could apply for the new money that's coming out.
The answer is yes, very possibly yes. That would be the answer.
I think we should consider that that's going to be, at least in my sector of small chamber music organizations, that's the main amount of employees we have.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And just so everyone knows, the email for the VLA is in this chat, and it will also be in the email for the recap of this presentation that I'll be sending right after we're done. We did have one question that was skipped over. Is there coordination of this information with the Main Streets directors? They can be a lifeline for some of the fringe and small arts business in the city.
Yeah, we're working with our partners in the Economic Development Office for the city on just sharing information. They're providing support through Main Streets to small businesses right now. I think, you know, their version of this call had over 500 small businesses on it. Their small business survey, you know, similar to what we just saw from the MCC, like the numbers are, you know, not good and alarming. And so I think there's a lot of focus on their dollars, which come through federal funds as well, and thinking about how to support small business through that and what the loans, small business loans are going to mean for them. So I think we're in coordination with them, but I will say that their hands are super full just thinking about the small businesses in their small business districts, and how to be a conduit of information at that super local level as well. But we are working with them. We're in touch with them on all of this.
Great. Sarah said, so as an arts organization, we apply for our employees as they are a W-2. Where?
Response to this, Pascal, for the chat box. So this is what I was talking about. There are a couple of loan programs that have been included in the Federal CARES Act. And those loan programs, so it's the Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loans and Small Business Administration Loans, will allow you to use those dollars, if you apply and get the loan, for payroll, right? And those loans are forgivable as long as you meet the provisions of that loan. So AKA you wouldn't have to pay them back as long as you meet the provisions. One of the provisions will be that you don't lay off the people that you are paying on the payroll, right? So so again, this bill, literally knock wood, cross fingers, was signed into law 17 minutes ago. And at that point, it's gonna start moving and being implemented, and we'll see how it's gonna be implemented. But the small business administrations are a place where they're going to deal with the emergency loans. Your banks may be able to help you with that. And then to repeat that, the Mass Cultural Council and the Nonprofit Finance Fund are going to do a training that relates to this, and to look out for that. And obviously Pascal will be sure to update everyone with that information.
Thanks, Emily. Great. Are there any guidelines placed from the city that might help arts organizations to cancel events and facilities around the city, and who are in jeopardy of losing deposits or other sunk costs? Ooh.
I assume we're talking about in private venues or in other nonprofit venues. We don't have guidelines about that right now. Maybe that's something we can connect with offline. You're referring to exactly?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have anything as of yet.
Cool.
We had a comment a little bit further up about our discussions happening about a new normal after the virus is controlled.
Yes.
Yeah, we're definitely hearing a lot of conversations about that. I think it has been hard for people to separate from the kind of crisis immediate response mode to start thinking about what is that new normal, and people who are trying to wrap their minds around what that means, how that's going to affect programs. And I think this goes back to that audience behavior question. You know, I think this week we're seeing a lot of people realize that coming back from this is not going to be like flipping the switch and just going back to how things were. But I think that's definitely been a process and a difficult one to just kind of come to terms with, because a lot of us are having to let go of a lot of planning and time and money and energy that went into thinking about what is this year going to be for me or for my organization. But as people are kind of working through that, yes, I think we'd love to host more conversation around that. What is the new normal and how do people adjust and what does that mean for the work that we do? And if anyone has thoughts about that now, please feel free to share.
Hello, my name is Veronica. Thank you for the information. Well, there's so much going on, a lot of information, so sometimes we get lost, but I'm a little concerned about the Latino artists that are not familiar with all of this information. So I've been working on surveys in Spanish, so I'm gathering a lot of information, and especially those artists like me that we are full-time artists. So for now, all of our gigs and contracts and concerts and public presentations have been canceled all the way through May. And people like me that I have my own nonprofit organization also that is also financial, supported by my art. So it's also stop, everything we have to stop. We are trying to provide information and classes via Zoom, because we don't want to lose contact with our members, which are about 400. So, and all their kids are right now home, staying home. So we're trying to provide that information. But now when I started getting my calls and emails canceling all the contracts all the way through August, I'm starting getting concerned about that. So I'm trying to think ways of gather all the information about these Latinos only Spanish speakers that are out there working in restaurants or gigs, so because they are right now really hit hard and they frustrated, they have families, they have their kids, so they're home without being able to do anything, and so they don't have these resources. So I'm trying to see if we can come together and start, supporting each other. So I just wanted to let you know that, and as soon as I gather all the information, I will be sharing it with you, and also see if I can kind of advocate or have them or bring them to this world so we can all support each other.
Yeah, that's great, Veronica. I really appreciate that. I think we also have some funding available to do some translation as well. So I think that particularly once we get a sense of how these funds, again, like how they hit the ground and how people apply, we should touch base with you and some other folks who are doing this work, not in the art sector at all, but thinking about other non-English speaking populations, to make sure that we have something that's translated and a network with which to distribute that effectively. So yeah, let's touch base about that, and would love to hear kind of what you're finding.
Yes, thank you, because it's not only just the language part, but it's also don't know how, how to be there, how to navigate the system, and how to apply, and all those different things that we want to address. Thank you, Sabrina, who is also jumping in and willing to support. But yeah, thank you so much for all this information and for including me in this meeting.
Thank you so much. We did have one more question from Melissa. Should decisions to furlough employees be held off until we know when the funds from the loan will be available, or can we furlough and then hire back when the funds are available?
So this is Emily. I don't know that anyone can tell you or can say whether or not you should hold off on furloughing employees. Here's what I know right now, as the folks that I'm talking to are interpreting the law. So if you furlough and then get the loan and the funds are available, you can rehire. And as long as you keep those people hired during the terms of the loan will be forgiven. I hope that's helpful. I think obviously we're all having to make a lot of difficult choices about what to do with our staffs and our organizations. So I recognize that that's probably not the full answer, but that is how I'm understanding the terms of the loan. The next question has to do from Pascal, I'm sorry, I'm taking over your job, but I'm just seeing this
Go
question
for it.
for Gracia. So there's a question about projections about how damaging the loss of tax revenue will be to the city and the state budget. So my understanding on the state level is that they're going to hold a hearing pretty soon with their team that, you know, the department that looks at revenue, the Department of Revenue, and give some some reforecasted estimations about what it's going to look like. But I think even without that official pronouncement, we are looking at a sort of devastated tax revenue right now. And I think all the lawmakers that I'm talking about are mentioning that too. And I think that we're going to see that a lot of folks are going to be asking and advocating to make sure that their needs are represented and reflected in any legislation that is economic recovery legislation that comes out of the state legislature, as well as the annual budget. Usually around this time of year, the House has released their version of the state's budget. And 2 weeks ago, Chair Michaelwitz on the House side announced that they're delaying that because they just didn't have enough information. So I think we can count that we're going to see a reduction in revenue, and that's going to affect the budget. And I think that's another really good reason why now more than ever, we need to remind our legislators and decision makers that the arts and cultural sector is made up of people who have jobs and incomes that are dependent on that sector. And that we are culture bearers in our communities. We are points of bringing people together. We are economic drivers in our neighborhoods and our downtowns, and that we should not be forgotten when decisions are being made and when they're thinking about funding, especially if we want to see a more stable economic recovery coming out of this. So that's my plug for always advocating and a couple of quick talking points.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Katie says, what is the time frame for receiving our BCC grants? We're looking at every projected dollar these days.
Yeah, those are going out, I think today. They might be mailed. If there are other BCC grantees on, I do want to caution that our auditing department, just like the rest of City Hall, is trying to figure out how to work part-time shifts and also remotely. So we are moving everything as fast as we can, but also may experience some administrative hiccups, but it's all coming. It's coming if it's not now, it'll be like a week from now.
Thanks so much, Cara. Any other questions? We have 2 more minutes.
Oh, I just want to say one other message to BCC grantees. Also, just a reminder that all of those funds are general operating funds. So please do not worry about grant reporting or project specific things having to change or anything like that. Like once you get this funding, it's your funding to do with whatever you need to do for your organization. So please don't worry about that.
Thanks so much, Cara. Anyone else for any questions? Looking back to make sure we got everybody.
You're ending right on time. So impressive.
Yes. Last call for questions. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for providing your questions, your resources, and all the information. Like I said, I'll be sending out an email probably in the next 5 minutes with the PowerPoint, as well as the links to the VLA contact info, the link to the Mass Cultural Council Legislative Listening event, and link to the AFTA website with the resources. We will have a link of this meeting recorded on the boston.gov website, which will be linked in this email as well. We will be having this meeting every Friday until, who knows, at 3 o'clock on Zoom. So that link will also be in this email too. So please let me know if you have any questions. If you happen to not be on our list, please send an email to me and I'll be happy to add you to our list just in case we didn't get you the first hand. I think that's any. Did I miss anything, Cara?
No, I think that's it. I hope everyone can absorb some sunlight or take a walk or do something to kind of decompress a little bit. I know we all need it, and we're here, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, thank you all so much. Have a good weekend.